Welcome to Bible Believers Fellowship and our continued study of the book of Daniel. In this study, we will look at the clash of kingdoms, reading Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 through 28. This is an amazing prophecy and an amazing study of one of the most amazing books in the Bible. So open your King James Bible and join us now in our study of the clash of the kingdoms and Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 through 18.
Tonight we're going to pick up where we left off in Daniel 7 and see, building on the four beasts that were prophesied in the vision, and also it spoke of the coming of the one like unto the Son of Man, the Ancient of Days, and judgment and all that. And now we get into this week, building on that narrative, the verses that complete chapter 7, we get interpretation and a conclusion of the vision of the four wild beasts. And we pick up in verse 13, and have you read that with me. I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. And verse 14, it says, and there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. Amen. It's an everlasting dominion. Now, look at what it says in Revelation 11:15. And the seventh angel sounded, and there were great voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of His Christ, and He shall reign forever and ever. Amen. There you go with the Daniel and Revelation parallels, and how those two books go together. I was telling Francis that we're going to go through Daniel, and then eventually we're going to go through Revelation. But there are a few places at least I want to hit before we do that, because Revelation, God put that as the last book in the Bible for a reason. Now he begins, after he sees this, he then responds and he says, I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit, in verse 15. In the midst of my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. That's verse 15 describes somebody who is shaken to the very core of their being. You know, we can read these things and we're like, oh, it's a vision. Oh, that's really neat. You have to really put your thinker on and really allow this to sink in. This vision that he's experienced, that's what I meant to say. It's not just something he's seeing. This is a vision he is experiencing. I personally believe, there's different ways that people will understand these things, but I believe that God stands outside of time. God created time. God created space. God created matter. He's not subject to any of those things. He is outside of those things. And I picture it, and I've heard it put this way by other preachers, and I think it's a really good way of understanding it. It's like us. This is just a picture. It's not a perfect picture, but it's like us being in a helicopter up above a parade that goes all the way from 270 to 270 on Route 23. And we can be up in the air looking down on that straight stretch of road, and we can see from beginning to end. And we know everything going on in between. Yeah. But we're in the parade. And we can only see what's around us right here and within our line of sight. So we have no idea what's going on in the beginning and what's going on in the end, but God knows the beginning from the end. And so Daniel, like us, he doesn't have that understanding, even though he's being given some wonderful revelation. He still doesn't understand it all. He still is asking questions. It says in verse 16, I came near unto one of them that stood by and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me and made me know the things, the interpretation of the things. So he's getting a little help in understanding it, but we'll see on a number of occasions where Daniel says, I just don't understand. And he'll even pray for more understanding. It's because Daniel's like us. He's down here in the parade. He doesn't see from beginning to end. But he is given and shares with us some of the information that we want to know. And he's given the interpretation somewhat in verses 17, 18. Look what he says. These great beasts, which are four, which we talked about last week, the four wild beasts, are four kings, which shall arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. So he's troubled to the very core of his being, in his body, in his spirit, he says. But here he's given this much information. And folks, this is the information you and I have. Look, we are facing perilous times. Our president is trying to, by dictator-styled executive order, push gun control. And right now he's pushing to basically try to disarm people along the border states, so that the end result would be that do you know there's been over 30,000 people killed in Mexico in just the last few months?
I wouldn't doubt it.
It's like Vietnam down there, and you can't get that information on the news. Our news media is just a bunch of ignoramus dopes, and they don't tell anybody anything. And they're trying to, it looks like they're trying to cause that to spill over into our country. Why else would they disarm everybody in the border states? Why? Because you got a Muslim president. And he, as a Muslim, is going to lie and lie and lie, and in order to get what he wants, which is the destruction of this country. Yeah. The guy put out a book, Audacity of Hope, and in other things he wrote, he said he was going to purposely kill the coal industry in this country so that he can then cause gas prices, natural gas and gasoline prices, to go through the roof, so that then he can put us in economic chaos. He put it all in writing. But the news media won't report it because they're a bunch of idiots. And most of the people in this country are ignorant because they get their news from the media, from the mainstream sources. Yeah. And that's exactly, we're sitting here like Daniel, and we don't understand these things. And then some of us who even understand these things, we look at it and say, Lord, what is going on? I mean, our country is... I go on and on about why I believe that, we are just right on the precipice of really seeing chaos in this country.
Yes, amen.
But we do know that, we could be killed, we could be persecuted, but it's all temporary. We are promised that even after this wild beast of nations rise out of the earth, he then stops right there and says, but the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever, even forever and ever. He's not done. He stops right in the middle of interpreting what this vision's all about to say, now, before you get any more sick, Daniel, before you get any more shook up, Daniel, understand something. I've read the back of the book and we win. Amen? That's what he's being told. And these four beasts, I want to remind you of what we saw when we first started, is that match beast for part of the image, with the gold head being the lion with the wings as an eagle, which is Babylon, and the arms of silver, which is Medo-Persia, which is the bear, and then the golden girdle, which is the leopard with the wings of the fowl, 4 wings, which means it flies faster than even Babylon did, and that's Greece. And then this thing that wasn't even compared to an animal we know of, so you'll see it. I saw one guy put it as a dinosaur or something, with a whole bunch of horns on it. But we don't know what it actually looked like, but it was just, that's why they draw them like that, because it's just a ferocious beast, unlike the previous 3, and it's Rome, the legs of iron, which then will become the toes of iron and clay. And so that's where Daniel focuses his attention as he's thinking about this vision. He says in verse 19, then I would know the truth of the fourth beast. See, he doesn't ask a lot of questions about the first three. One reason, obvious reason why, is because that fourth beast was not like a lion, a bear, or a leopard. It was not even described. And it was like, listen how he describes it. Which was diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were of iron, and his nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet. So that's what Daniel focuses on. It says, I would know about this fourth beast, this bad beast. And he says, and of the 10 horns in verse 20, that were in his head, and of the other, which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes, and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. You think of politicians, that's what you ought to think of right there. They're just a bunch of big mouths. They just run in their mouths and lie. I heard on one radio program today where they played Obama lying over and over and over. Not questionable lies, just flat out lies. I mean, the guy lied about his mom when she had cancer. He went around telling everybody that she was denied coverage because she had a pre-existing condition. It was a lie. She was covered. What they didn't do was pay for her home and her utilities and some things like that. But that's because she didn't have coverage for that. How many of you have health insurance that will pay for all your bills? Nobody. So he lied the entire time he was on. He even told a story about these liberties in our country that when they buried his dad and they draped the flag over his dad when they buried him in memory of those liberties. His dad was Kenyan. What flag is he talking about? But he made it sound like it was an American flag. Over and over and over, you can go on the internet and see Obama lying and lying and lying. Now, he's not much worse than a lot of other politicians that are running for president right now. But this guy just kind of takes the cake. But there's coming a guy, because I don't believe Obama is the Antichrist. I believe he's an Antichrist. But there's coming one who's going to make Obama look like child's play. Yeah. And it says that he will speak very great things, and his look was more stout than his fellows, cocky, and just very confident, overconfident. And he just thinks way too much of himself. And that again is comparable to what we read in Revelation 13, verses 4 and 5. I call it the little horn with the big mouth. In Revelation 13, 4 and 5, and they worshiped the dragon which gave power unto the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast, and who is able to make war with him? That reminds me of the past election. And there was given unto him a mouth. Isn't that funny? In Daniel and Revelation. Given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. And power was given unto him to continue 42 months. But look again now what it says in verses 6 through 8. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints, and to overcome them. And power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. Notice it says he overcomes the saints. In verse 21, I beheld, this is Daniel 7, verse 21, I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them. So you go from Daniel 7:20 over to Revelation 13, and it leads you right back to verse 21 in Daniel 7. He's got a big mouth. He says a lot of blasphemous, great things, and he makes war against the saints and prevails against them. Now, this is one proof that the church is not going to be in the tribulation period. People see that word saints and they say, oh, well, that's Christians in the tribulation. No, it's not. All throughout the Old Testament, Jews are called saints. And the reason we know that this isn't the church is because it says that he prevails against them. The fact is, all who deny the pre-trib rapture claim that the saints is a reference to the church. They have that in common. And the only people who deny that this is the church are pre-trib Christians. We deny it because it is not the church. Now look at this. If the saints in the tribulation are the church, then this verse, Daniel 7:21, contradicts Jesus Christ and makes him out to be a liar. Amen. Look at it again. I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them. Compare that with Matthew 16:18. Jesus, first let's get Revelation 11:7. And when they shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them and shall overcome them and kill them. So in the tribulation, it's no question the Antichrist is going to prevail over the saints. He's going to overcome the saints. In other places in Revelation 13:7, it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. Compare that with then Matthew 16:18. Jesus said, and I say unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. The saints are not born-again Christians in the tribulation period. Amen. The tribulation period is the 70th week of Daniel. It's basically the last week, the last 7 years of the Old Testament. The Old Testament isn't done. And people have it all messed up because they hear it preached that when John the Baptist came, he concluded the Old Testament, and then Jesus died, was buried, and rose again, and that started the New Testament, so the Old Testament's done. No, it's not. And during that time, there's no church. Why? Because there was no church in the other 69 weeks. There's no church in the Old Testament. And the church is removed when the 70th week, before the 70th week begins. And so that's why we see it again in verses 21, 22. I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them. Notice now it says, until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. Now we're not going to run all the references, but how many times you read over and over where Jesus and Paul talk about that we're going to judge? He says, don't you know you're going to be actually judge angels? Oh, yeah. And he told the disciples, you remember, they would all sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And that's what this is making reference to. This is the last 7 years before verse 22 happens. And verse 22 is when the Ancient of Days came and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. This is where we have to remember it gets worse before it gets better, but keep in mind that Jesus prevails in the end. Amen. It's very difficult to deal with some of this stuff going on. It's very difficult to deal with the injustices. It's very difficult to see the persecution overseas, especially of Christians, but creeping in over here in America. It's very difficult to deal with. But we have to understand this is temporary. I want to tell you something. I'm a student of history. I'm not a historian, but I love history. I read history. I watch documentaries. And when I guess there's kind of a connection to the Civil War because my mom's done a lot of research about our family, and I've learned a lot of that. I was born and raised a Yankee. I was born and raised in Ohio. But I'm telling you something. If you ever study the Civil War, get prepared to realize that Abraham Lincoln was a demon-possessed man. And Sherman and Sheridan and these guys were just demons. And they went through telling the soldiers to go into unarmed civilians, rape the women, kill the old men. They took young boys and hung them with cords. They burned cities. They stole everything they could carry and destroyed the rest. And you think they were fighting to free the slaves? They raped all the black women, they killed the black men, and stole everything they had too. You find out that the history books are a load of garbage.
Oh, yeah, amen. That's right.
And what you also find out is that if God were to give me the power of time travel, I would have shot Abe Lincoln in the head 4 years before he was shot. But then you have to step back and say, wait a minute. That's not your place. God is in control. And we have to keep in mind, Jesus prevails in the end. And the Civil War, I think when you read it, there's one thing you get no matter what you read. Both sides will agree to one thing. It was an absolute bloodletting disaster. Something like 600,000 troops slaughtered. Both sides basically ended up with concentration camps because they couldn't afford to feed the men, and then they'd get smallpox and all kinds of other illnesses, and it would just kill thousands at a time. It's just horrible. But this great tribulation period to come is going to make that look like a picnic. So let's continue and close in there in verses 23 and 24. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. This is this fourth beast. And just like I said about the tribulation period being like nothing we've ever seen, this fourth beast will be like no empire. You read about those barbarians, and you read about Nero, and you read about all these things. This fourth kingdom will be worse than any of those. It'll be total destruction wherever it decides to unleash its power. But then in verse 24, he repeats this numerous times. You can't miss this in Daniel. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise. There are people who will debate that still, even though it's exactly what it says. The 10 horns are 10 kings. They arise out of that kingdom. What was that kingdom? That kingdom is Rome. And Rome was not ever destroyed. It crumbled and remained in existence right up to this very day. It is still there. And that's the 10 toes. Out of those kingdoms of the fourth beast will rise 10 kings. And it says, another shall rise after them. He shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. So you have 10, and then one comes up and devours 3. So now you're left with 8. But really, I break it down for you there if you want to kind of make notes. This is the breakdown. It's really pretty simple. Fourth beast is the fourth kingdom. Out of this fourth kingdom rise 10 horns. From these 10 horns will arise 1 king, and this 1 king will remove 3 and leaving himself with 7 under him. See how that works? Now, I kind of come up with this picture in my mind as I was thinking of it, so I went ahead and made this little thing. I'm not saying this will be, but I could picture the Antichrist flying this flag. But you see the 1, and he's over the 7. I put some symbols down there on purpose. He will claim to be the Alpha and the Omega, which Jesus claimed to be, the beginning and the end. You have the moon over there. He will usurp all of Islam. You see the lightning bolt. That's all the New Age occult religions. In the middle there is an upside-down cross because he will usurp all of apostate Christianity. And then next to that is the gay symbol because it'll be a complete sex-crazed society left behind. Bisexual, trisexual, whatever you want to call it. And then over there is the sun because of the nature worshipers and people like that. And so those are the symbols that I kind of come up with of the 7 kings. They'll kind of usurp all of these religions as well as political kingdoms. And they will all serve the one. Now if you notice the shape of the star, that's called a Baphomet or Baphomet. And it is the symbol of Freemasonry. It's the symbol of the occult. And it is the symbol of Lucifer, and it is believed to be the god of light, the light bearer. They have it all upside down, backwards. And it's blackened out because we don't know what he's going to look like. I mean, we have some ideas what he might look like as far as, we'll get into that some other time we study the Antichrist. but we have no idea who he is. And I mentioned that here. It's a ridiculous exercise in futility to attempt to identify the Antichrist. And I know people who spend a lot of brain cells and time trying to figure out who the Antichrist is. You won't know him until the 10 horns arise out of Rome. You won't know him before that one, who will be the Antichrist, subdues 3 of the 10. You won't know him before that one rules all, and you won't know him until he signs a 7-year covenant, including Israel and the world. That comes from Daniel 9:27. So there's no use of trying to find out who the Antichrist is. But man, there have been a lot of books and a lot of time wasted on that. That leads us now to verses 25 and 26. And again, we've seen this several times. And it repeats it over and over. We'll see it again as we go through Daniel. Verse 25, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. And they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. That's time, times, and a half. That's 3.5 years. And that's the 3.5 years of great tribulation. There's a difference between 7-year tribulation and the 3.5 years of great tribulation. But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and to destroy it unto the end. So again, it looks bad, but in the end, he is going to go down. Now, how many of you ever heard, I've had people numerous times through the years come up to me and say, well, you know, it's like right now, let's say we got a little cold spell and there was snowflakes coming down in July. I've seen it in June. But let's say it happened in July, and I'll have people come up and say, well, you know, when the seasons change, we know it's the end times. And they get it from, it's a misunderstanding of and careless reading of that verse we just read, where it talks about the Antichrist will seek to change the times and the seasons. He does that because he is the Antichrist. He's in place of and opposed to God or Christ, Jesus himself. Well, in Daniel 2:20 and 21, we read about God, and we can see how he's trying to counterfeit God. In Daniel 2:20, it says, Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And look at verse 21. Look at this. And he changeth the times and the seasons. He moveth kings and setteth up kings. That's God. So the Antichrist is going to seek to change times and seasons, counterfeiting the one who does. So when he is destroyed, then of course commence the millennium. Read that with me, verse 27. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. So we come down to this end, and we're given this glorious end, and we had better remember this. Because when things get bad and the going gets tough, we need to be able to grasp and hold on to this promise that God is working all this out according to his plan. But there are times you're going to feel like Daniel in verse 28. Hitherto is the end of the matter. That's basically he's saying the end. But he then puts this little postscript here. As for me, Daniel, my cogitations much troubled me, and my countenance changed in me, but I kept the matter in my heart. Be sure to visit our website at kjvbiblebelievers.com, where you can find a wealth of MP3 audio message downloads, along with additional videos, articles, and links. This message is brought to you by Bible Believers Fellowship, P.O. Box 662, Worthington, Ohio 43085. I am Greg Miller. Thank you for listening.